What if I told you that Machiavelli discovered a truth about loyalty so disturbing that it shatters every romantic illusion men have ever held? A truth that explains why the most devoted woman can seemingly vanish overnight, leaving behind nothing but confusion and betrayal. You're about to uncover what he called the sword that cuts through affection, a psychological pattern that most men never see coming until it's too late. This isn't about modern dating or relationship advice. This is about a fundamental law of human nature that Machiavelli observed centuries ago, one that still governs the hidden mechanics of loyalty today. Machiavelli once wrote that when affection fades, loyalty is put to the sword. But what did he truly mean by that? He wasn't speaking about fleeting passion or lust. He was dissecting something far deeper, something most men still fail to understand even today. He observed that a woman's loyalty is not born from duty or reason, but from emotion. Her allegiance is tied not to the man himself, but to the feeling he awakens within her. As long as that feeling lives, her devotion seems unbreakable. But the moment it dies, she does not betray him. She simply transfers her loyalty to the next emotion that restores her sense of aliveness. To Machiavelli, this was not deceit, it was nature's design. A woman, like any strategist of survival, aligns herself with the source of vitality. Her heart does not seek consistency. It seeks energy. It seeks power. It seeks the emotional pulse that makes her feel desired, protected, or significant. When that pulse weakens, when she can no longer feel herself reflected in the man's strength, her loyalty begins to shift quietly in the shadows, long before her body ever moves. Machiavelli found this pattern disturbing, not because it exposed female weakness, but because it revealed the illusion that men cling to, the illusion that loyalty can be owned, that devotion can be guaranteed once declared. He realized that a man's greatest mistake is believing that love once won is love forever secured. He noted that when a man loses his command of his own emotions, when he becomes desperate, needy, or overly dependent on a woman's affection, he stops being the source of that feeling she once admired. The balance reverses. She begins to see in him what she fears most, weakness, and the loyalty that once burned like fire turns into quiet resentment, then indifference. In his private notes, Machiavelli compared this transformation to the changing tides of power in the state. When the prince loses authority, he wrote, his allies do not betray. They simply seek another throne. In the same way, when a woman feels that her emotional kingdom is collapsing, she seeks a new sovereign, not out of malice, but out of instinct. Her loyalty follows life itself. It follows movement, power, and certainty. This is why Machiavelli viewed emotion as the most dangerous weapon in human politics. For emotion, not logic, determines allegiance, and no vow, no oath, no promise can compete with the shifting nature of what the heart desires to feel. He warned that the man who chases emotional reassurance will always lose power, for he becomes the servant of the very emotion he once commanded. The moment he begins to beg for loyalty, he has already surrendered his throne. Machiavelli's conclusion was merciless. Loyalty ends the moment desire does, because desire is not just attraction. It is the currency of influence. When a man no longer makes a woman feel, she no longer follows. But the question that haunted Machiavelli, and should haunt every man listening now, was this: if loyalty depends on emotion, can it ever be truly owned, or only borrowed until the feeling fades? In the heart of Florence, amidst the whispers of nobility and the perfume of deceit, Machiavelli observed something that would forever alter his understanding of loyalty. It was not written in his public works. It was recorded in his hidden journals under candlelight when he no longer wrote for kings or courts, but for truth alone. He called it the experiment of the courtyard, a silent observation of how loyalty bends when power begins to fade. He watched as the noblemen of Florence, charming, powerful, and adored, were surrounded by women whose affection seemed unshakable. Yet Machiavelli, ever the skeptic, wondered what would happen if these men suddenly lost everything that made them desirable. Their titles, their gold, their status, stripped away. One by one, he watched fortune turn against them. Some lost influence at court, others fell out of favor with powerful allies, and as their power waned, Machiavelli noticed a quiet but devastating shift. Their lovers, once devoted, grew distant. The warmth in their eyes cooled. Their loyalty, once loud and public, dissolved into silence. It wasn't anger that drove them away. It was absence, the absence of power, the absence of certainty. He wrote in his private notes, "A woman's loyalty follows the shadow of power, as a sunflower follows the sun. When the light departs, she turns not in betrayal, but in search of life." To him, this was not cruelty, it was instinct. A woman's emotional compass was tuned to security, to vitality, to the presence of force. When that force dimmed, she adapted. She reoriented herself to survive. What fascinated Machiavelli was how seamless this transition was. The same women who had sworn eternal devotion would, without rage or rebellion, redirect their affection toward another man, one who exuded confidence, command, or rising potential. It was not lust, it was preservation. In their minds, they were not abandoning one man. They were maintaining their position in a world that punished attachment to weakness. He saw the same pattern repeated among courtiers, mistresses, and even queens. Loyalty was never personal. It was proportional. It mirrored the power of its object. And so, when the balance of power shifted, so too did the current of loyalty. Machiavelli concluded that loyalty was not a static virtue, but a living organism, one that feeds on dominance, confidence, and certainty. Once those vanish, it withers. He noted that men, blinded by pride, often confuse possession with permanence. They believe that once affection is won, it cannot be lost, but the courtyard taught him otherwise. Affection, like influence, must be maintained through strength, not through pleading, not through sentiment, but through silent authority. He wrote, "A woman's heart is a mirror, not a monument. It reflects what stands before it. When the reflection weakens, the image fades." In that reflection, he found the truth that would trouble him for the rest of his life, that loyalty and power are twins, bound by necessity. What unsettled him most was how invisible the shift could be. The laughter remained, the gestures stayed polite, yet beneath the surface, allegiance had already changed sides. To Machiavelli, this quiet disloyalty was not betrayal, it was evolution. A woman could love deeply, but when her environment no longer promised stability, she did what every strategist must do. She adapted before she was defeated. And so Machiavelli began to ask himself, if loyalty follows power, then does love follow truth, or only the illusion of strength that keeps truth hidden? Machiavelli believed that every emotion, love, loyalty, passion, was ultimately ruled by fear. He wrote that men are kept loyal by the hope of reward, but women are kept devoted by the fear of loss, not fear of violence or punishment, but the deeper, quieter fear of emotional absence, the terror of losing the man who commands her respect, her fascination, her pulse. He studied how affection rises and falls not with comfort, but with tension. The moment a man becomes too safe, too predictable, too easily read, affection begins to decay. Desire requires risk, and fear, Machiavelli believed, is the silent architect of attraction. When a woman feels that she could lose a man's attention, she invests more deeply to preserve it. But when she feels certain of his submission, when she knows that his world revolves around her, something inside her begins to wither. The dynamic reverses. She becomes the one with power, and he becomes the one enslaved by his own need for reassurance. In the political world, Machiavelli had seen this truth countless times. Princes who ruled with pure affection were adored for a season, then overthrown when that affection faded. But those who commanded respect through a balance of love and fear maintained loyalty far longer. He applied this principle not only to states, but to the battlefield of intimacy. He who wishes to be loved must also know how to be feared, he wrote, not with cruelty, but with presence, with self-control, with emotional authority. He observed that when a man refuses to be conquered by emotion, a woman's respect deepens. His composure becomes the invisible throne upon which her loyalty sits. She may challenge him, test him, provoke him, but subconsciously, she is seeking proof that he cannot be broken by her storms. For in that strength, she feels safe. Machiavelli saw this paradox as the foundation of female loyalty. Affection sustained not by comfort, but by uncertainty. A man who cannot be easily moved, whose love is offered with intention rather than desperation, awakens a fear in her, not of him, but of losing him. That fear is what makes her devotion endure long after passion fades. It becomes an emotional gravity that holds her close. For as long as she feels that his absence would wound her, her loyalty remains intact. But once she senses that he fears losing her more than she fears losing him, the spell breaks. The dynamic shifts. Her heart no longer follows him. It studies him, measures him, and prepares to detach. Machiavelli saw in this balance the same laws that govern kingdoms. A ruler who fears his subjects becomes a servant. A ruler who inspires both admiration and caution becomes eternal. He realized that in love, as in politics, affection without authority leads to rebellion. The moment a woman senses that her emotional power exceeds a man's, her loyalty dissolves into curiosity. What else might she feel, and where might that power lead her next? Machiavelli understood that fear, when mastered, does not destroy love. It protects it. It gives love edges, shape, and value, for what is freely abundant is rarely cherished. And so he asked himself, if love needs fear to survive, then is loyalty born from affection, or from the quiet terror of losing what one cannot control? Machiavelli once wrote that the greatest illusion in human affairs is faithfulness, that men believe in it because they need to, not because it truly exists. He didn't mean that loyalty was impossible. He meant it was conditional, shaped by forces men often refuse to see. In his private writings, he described faithfulness not as a virtue, but as a mirage, shimmering with promise yet disappearing the moment one tries to grasp it. To him, loyalty in women was not the eternal flame poets sang of, but the reflection of a deeper reality, one built on necessity, perception, and advantage. In the Renaissance courts, Machiavelli observed women who appeared perfectly loyal, devoted wives, patient mistresses, even queens who risked everything for love. Yet beneath their vows, he saw an intricate design. Their faithfulness was rarely blind, it was transactional, though few dared to admit it. These women remained not because of sentiment, but because of value. Their loyalty was anchored to the man who represented stability, safety, or prestige. They stayed as long as their presence beside him preserved their identity. And the moment it no longer did, their fidelity quietly evaporated. Machiavelli compared this to the alliances of princes. No state, he said, remains loyal to another out of affection. It remains so long as it benefits. Once the advantage fades, so does the allegiance. He realized the same law governed the human heart. Even in love, loyalty follows interest. But interest is not always material. It can be emotional, social, or symbolic. A woman's faithfulness, therefore, is tied to what she feels she gains by remaining when her emotional investment stops yielding the sense of admiration, growth, or safety she once felt. Her loyalty is no longer sustained by duty. It becomes a hollow gesture waiting to collapse. This realization did not make Machiavelli bitter. It made him precise. He stopped viewing disloyalty as betrayal and began to see it as strategy. A woman, like any skilled political actor, adjusts her position based on the changing currents of influence. When she turns away from a man, it is not always because she has stopped loving him. It may be because he no longer symbolizes what she once needed to survive. He wrote, "Those who call it treachery do not understand preservation. To him, even in affection, self-preservation is the highest instinct." What fascinated him was how masterfully women conceal this adaptation beneath the language of emotion. Their loyalty appears personal, romantic, and eternal, but beneath it lies a silent calculation, an assessment of strength, stability, and potential. This is why the same woman who stands by a man through hardship may abandon another in an instant. Her loyalty does not measure suffering, It measures worth. Machiavelli observed that the faithful heart does not beat for the man himself, but for the meaning he provides her life. When that meaning fades, she seeks a new narrative, a new mirror to see herself through. The illusion of the faithful heart, then, is not that loyalty doesn't exist. It's that it depends entirely on perception. A man may believe he possesses a woman's devotion, when in truth, he only possesses her reflection of his power. As long as he maintains that reflection, through presence, confidence, and emotional discipline, her loyalty appears steadfast. But once he loses his command over her perception, once she begins to see him as ordinary, predictable, or diminished, her devotion starts to blur. Not with rage, not with conflict, but with quiet detachment. Machiavelli found this both terrifying and enlightening. It meant that loyalty was never secure. It was constantly negotiated in the unseen theater of emotion and power. He realized that what men call faithfulness is often just a moment of alignment, a temporary balance where a woman's needs and a man's power coexist in harmony. But harmony, as he knew too well, is fragile, and so he wondered, if every faithful heart is but a mirror reflecting the strength before it, what happens when the mirror no longer sees a reflection worth following? Machiavelli was not a coward, but he understood danger better than anyone alive in his time. He had seen how truth could destroy reputations, end alliances, and ignite wars more swiftly than any sword. And so, when his private observations about female loyalty began to reveal something that could unravel the moral foundation of his society, he made a choice, not to erase it, but to bury it. He hid the study because he knew that the moment it reached the wrong ears, it would not be read as wisdom, it would be seen as blasphemy. Florence, in his age, thrived on illusion. Marriages were not built on love, but on politics. Devotion was not an emotion, it was a contract of appearances. And yet, society depended on the myth that loyalty, especially a woman's loyalty, was pure, unwavering, divine. To question it was to question the very order of civilization. Machiavelli's hidden study did precisely that. It suggested that loyalty was not a heavenly virtue, but a tool, a strategy of adaptation, and that women, in their emotional intelligence, wielded it far more skillfully than men realized. He saw how such a revelation would tear through the fragile web of control that held families and alliances together. Men built their authority upon the belief that devotion was guaranteed once earned. Kings believed their queens would remain loyal because honor demanded it. But Machiavelli's study showed that loyalty was not governed by morality. It was governed by utility, emotion, and perception. A woman did not remain loyal because she should. She remained loyal because it served her purpose to do so. Once that purpose vanished, loyalty became a story told for public comfort. For Machiavelli, this was not cynicism, it was honesty. He admired the strategic intelligence hidden within women's emotions. He believed that what society called fickleness was in fact flexibility, the ability to adapt faster than men, to align with changing power before collapse occurred. But to publish that view was to expose the inner workings of emotional strategy, and he knew the cost. A prince could forgive a political betrayal, but a society cannot forgive an exposed illusion. The myth of feminine loyalty was the sacred thread that kept order intact. To pull at it was to risk unraveling everything. And so, he concealed it. He disguised its fragments within metaphors in the prince and the discourses, masking truth behind the veil of political allegory. He wrote of kingdoms, of alliances, of the fragile balance between fear and love. But beneath it all, he was speaking of human relationships. He saw no difference between the state and the heart. Both were ruled by ambition, fear, and necessity. Both required control. Both were lost the moment. Sentiment replaced strategy. Yet the decision to bury this study haunted him, because what he had discovered was not just a reflection of women. It was a mirror of mankind itself. If loyalty is built on necessity, then love too becomes conditional. If devotion can be commanded through perception rather than truth, then perhaps no human connection is as pure as we pretend. Perhaps all loyalty, political, romantic, or spiritual, exists only for as long as it sustains the illusion of safety. In the silence of his later years, Machiavelli feared that the real danger was not the study's content, but what it revealed about the human soul. That we are loyal not to people, but to the stories we tell ourselves about them. And when those stories change, our loyalty does too. He realized the study was not just about women. It was about everyone who ever believed love could exist without strategy, or loyalty without fear. But if all devotion is built on illusion, then what happens when truth finally strips that illusion bare? Machiavelli never despised love. He simply refused to romanticize it. To him, affection, loyalty, and desire were not sacred mysteries, but instruments of power, forces that shaped empires as surely as they shaped hearts. What he uncovered in his buried study was not an attack on women, but an unflinching examination of human strategy, how both men and women bend emotion to survive, to secure, and to rule. He understood that loyalty was never born from words or vows. It was born from influence. A woman, he believed, remains loyal not to promises but to presence, not to submission but to strength. When a man loses that strength, when his emotional composure cracks and his certainty fades, he stops being the center of her gravity. And in that moment, loyalty evaporates, not as betrayal, but as nature reclaiming balance. What Machiavelli's hidden pages reveal is a truth most people still cannot bear to face. Love and loyalty are never equal. One gives, the other weighs. One dreams, the other calculates. And between them lies the eternal game of perception, where power determines devotion and devotion disguises power. Yet, within this harsh truth lies something profoundly human. For even if loyalty is conditional and affection strategic, it still binds us. It still drives us to create meaning, to build connection, to seek influence through emotion. Machiavelli did not bury his study to hide the ugliness of human nature. He buried it to protect the illusion that keeps civilization from collapsing under the weight of truth. Because once you see loyalty as leverage, love as a transaction of influence, and emotion as a weapon of strategy, how do you ever believe in purity again? Perhaps that was Machiavelli's final test, not to reveal the truth, but to see who could face it and still choose to love despite knowing its cost.